Good morning. We've got a small group today, but as people come in, hopefully they can catch up pretty easily. This is a much calmer, slower training than our last IRB videos. So today is what to do after a protocol has already been approved by the IRB. There are some things that are required, some things that are situationally required if certain conditions are met, and then what to do if you need to change either how long you are conducting research or the actual content of your research, and then what to do when it's all done. So things we will cover are the things that are in the approval packet. Excuse me. What to do if any unanticipated problems occur or adverse events, what to do for progress reports if they are required, what to do if you need to amend your protocol at any point, how to continue and have a longer approval period, and how to close out your study. So when you are approved, you've gone through the pre-review, you've revised everything, lots of emails sometimes, and you've got your letter. So you think you're done? Not necessarily. There are things that you should keep in mind throughout the life of your study. So your approval packet will indicate what your IRB protocol number is. It's really easy for us to find correspondence when that is listed in the email subject line. You'll know what review level you are at, if it is exempt, expedited, or full board. It'll tell you the category. There are 8 exempt categories and 9 expedited categories. So you'll know what that falls under with federal definitions. It'll tell you your approval period as well as when the study expires, when your training expires, your city training specifically. Data needs to be retained typically for at least 3 years beyond the closure of the study. Unless it is sponsored research, there may be different requirements, and that will be listed in your approval packet. If you are required to have a report, that will be listed in your approval packet as well as when it is due. It'll show how to request a continuation if needed and how to close the project. It will also include, if applicable, a stamped consent document if that is part of your application, or if you have requested a waiver of any kind, that will be attached to your approval letter. And if you have requested a campus-wide survey approval, that will be attached to that packet as well, if approved. So a sample of what this could look like. If you are protocol 25-525, that will be listed in your letter. Your level is expedited, for example, under category 4, which is a collection of data through non-invasive procedures that are pretty common in clinical practice. It is approved for 3 years, November 15th, 2024 through 2027. It will tell you when your city training expires. Because city training only lasts for 3 years, it has potential to lapse during that approval period. So you will get an email from city before that happens to ensure that it does not lapse. If it does lapse, your research would have to pause until you get that training back in line. It'll tell you to retain data for at least 3 years after the closure, not from approval. If it is expedited, it typically would have that annual report due, and it would list the dates. It would tell you how to report and when to report any adverse events or unanticipated problems, how to request continuation and when, and then how to submit a closure report depending on what situation applies to you. And we'll go into each of these a little bit later in this training. And if you have consent forms, they will be stamped, and these are the only things you can photocopy or attach to your study. That should be the only one that is distributed to participants. That stamp shows that it has been approved, especially if you've gone through different versions. You can track which version is the appropriate one. And that stamp looks like this. So unanticipated problems and adverse events sound very similar. They do not happen in every study, but it is something to be aware of and what those are. So an unanticipated problem are those unanticipated things, unexpected events that have potential to increase the risk of harm, even if no harm has occurred. So that potential is really that difference between unanticipated problem and adverse events. So a data breach could increase risk of harm depending on who gets a hold of that data. A lab error, if data was reported incorrectly, could cause a problem, but it is not necessarily an adverse event until something happens. If a natural disaster comes, if your office floods and data is destroyed, that could turn into an adverse event. But if it is related to the subjects or data, but has not necessarily caused the harm, that would be unanticipated problems. The actual harmful or negative outcomes are experienced and become adverse events. Sometimes these are known problems, so it would not necessarily fall under unanticipated. So if you are doing a study with drugs, it's a clinical trial, you might know a side effect is a severe allergic reaction, but it's not an adverse event until someone has that side effect. If you are conducting an interview and you're aware that it could cause psychological distress, it's not an adverse event until that psychological distress is felt by a study subject. There could be a physical injury that is a harmful or negative outcome, or any sort of repercussions or reputational damage sustained due to the data breach. So an unanticipated problem could become an adverse event, but it's that difference between potential and actual. Yep. So it could turn into a worse situation if not managed. Both of these should be reported to the IRB as soon as possible, but always within 5 working days. And they are 2 different forms that ask slightly different questions. So the unanticipated problem report form asks when the problem occurred, when the study team learned of it, because it's not always at the same time. Just a brief description of what the problem is and how you plan to prevent it from reoccurring, as well as how to prevent it from turning into an adverse event when possible. So when it does become negative or harmful, a little bit more information is asked on this separate form. It will still ask the date of occurrence, how severe it is, to describe the event, what solution or treatment was applied for the subjects, what changes it necessitated in your protocol. If this is a problem that could occur more often, we need to obviously amend the protocol. And then there are links to both of those if you are going back in and looking at this presentation on your own time. So not every protocol requires a progress report. If it is required, it is listed in your approval document, and it must be submitted regularly to the IRB until the study is closed. In most cases, this is an annual progress report. However, if you are conducting higher risk studies, it might be more frequently. It's just checking in and making sure that that high risk is addressed and how it is being kept as low as possible and is safe for the subjects. The link is in here as well. And the questions that you will answer on your progress reports include how many subjects you have enrolled up to this point, how many have withdrawn, if any, how many subjects you intend to enroll for your future parts of your study. If there were any unanticipated problems or events, explain what they were and whether or not they were reported, and if not reported, explain why. If you have received any complaints, the IRB should be aware of what those complaints are. There should be a summary of what progress has been made and what remains while your study is still open. And if you have published anything or presented on the research, just give a brief list of citations of what that has been. And that was the end of that list. So if you need to change your protocol, if something happens that needs adjusted or added, taken out, any sort of modification should be reviewed and approved before it's implemented. So there are minor modifications, and these do not alter the risk-benefit assessment. It likely will not change what category it falls under. These are small things, but it still changes your original approval. So these may include changing the research team. If you are working with students, one graduates, you want to replace them with a new student. That's a minor modification. If your consent language needs to change just a little bit, if your recruitment is just a tweak in the language that doesn't actually change the material of the study, these are typically considered minor modifications. If you are changing the compensation or how long you expect them to participate, often these are minor. If you are adding a research site that is materially similar to what you've already been doing, typically that is a minor modification. It becomes major if it could alter the risk-benefit assessment or if there are new research activities being added. So some examples of that include adding a new instrument. If before it was just a survey, now you would like to extend it to a focus group. While it may not alter the risk-benefit, it is a new research activity. If you are changing inclusion or exclusion criteria, depending on what that is, it could be considered a major modification. If you are completely changing the informed consent process, not just small tweaks to language, that falls under major. If the confidentiality procedures change, that could alter the risk-benefit assessment, so it would be considered a major modification. And these, when approved, do not extend the original approval date. It is just an adjustment to the materials within that approval. When you do make amendments, they are named using the original protocol number, and we will use an underscore followed by the modification number, starting with 01. So your first amendment would be original document number underscore 1. The next one underscore 2. Not necessarily something you need to keep track of and remember, but it is how we document things in our files and how we will communicate with you in the correspondence email subject line. So the amendment form itself is fairly short and simple, but depending on how much you change affects what we need from you. So we'll request the form along with clean copies of anything that is amended or completely new documents. And if you are amending an original document, we do ask for the tracked change version, so we see what exactly was changed from approval to amendment request. And if it does affect the original language of the application, we do need that track change version of the original application. So this is the first part of that amendment request form, just knowing what amendment number it is. If you, as an investigator, think it's major or minor, a brief description of what is changing and why, and do you think it affects the risk-benefit ratio? And then we'll just ask what you are including as revised or new materials. And you will just list that and make sure you give us those copies. And then, of course, we always have you give an investigator assurance as well as a signature showing that it is complete and accurate to the best of your knowledge. Sometimes the protocol itself doesn't need to change, but you need more time with your research. You do have to get that approved, and we ask that you get that to the IRB no less than 45 days before you are set to expire. That gives the IRB time to review, request any sort of revisions, just in case it's not everything needed to approve that continuation. Because they cannot extend an approval if it lapses. If it does lapse, do not pass go, do not collect $200. You have to stop all human subjects research, any data collection, follow-up, analysis of information. Anything that falls under human subjects research cannot be continued under a lapsed protocol. You would have to reapply under a new protocol number. So it's really important to make sure you know about that 45-day request on our end so that we can get it approved before it expires. And the continuation requests have all the questions from the progress reports. And if you are amending things, we can do that at the continuation request. And then we will also ask for the updated city training for all research team members. So the continuation request is a web form instead of a PDF. So you would upload everything into that web form. And then when you are done, we would like you to close the study officially, just so we have a clear record of when it starts and ends. And that closure is also a fairly simple form. We ask that we get it by the expiration date, unless you stop quite a bit before the expiration date. So if you had a 3-year approval and you're done after 1 year, you don't have to wait another 2 years to close it. We just ask that you close it within 3 months of when you stopped your research. The latest we ask for it is at that expiration date, but within 3 months is preferred if you end early. So you will just give us obviously the basic information so we know what closure we are studying in our files. We need a reason for why it's closing. Either all of the human participation is complete, there's no follow-up, the data has no identifiable information left. If you've finished analyzing data, that could be a reason. If you are moving to another institution or are retiring, we still need to close it in our files. If you just couldn't complete the research due to funding, participation, personnel, for whatever reason, it just cannot continue, those are other reasons that could be selected, or for any other reason, just explain to us what it is. And then we'll ask for how many subjects you had, how many withdrew, where you are holding onto the informed consent documents, if applicable, so that we know that you have it for at least 3 years in case of an audit. And then about those unanticipated problems or adverse events, we would need to know what they were and then attach the form if needed. And then, as always, your assurance and signature. Like I said, much simpler training than the last few, but we have our contact information. All of these forms are on our website. It is under the UIS website umbrella. Ours is research, and then we do have a side for UIS IRB forms and resources. If you ever can't locate anything, you can just email us and we will send you either a link or a copy. And that leaves plenty of time for questions if there are any.